Okay, I've never talked about it before on this channel, but I am like aggressively into Trigun. And that started with me watching Trigun Stampede when it first released around that time. And I've been anticipating Stargaze for the better part of like 1 or 2 years. Either way, I was really excited for it. And I just watched all of it. And I have many thoughts and feelings. Unfortunately, not many of them are good. So this video is going to be mostly unscripted. I have an outline here, but this is just going to be my raw thoughts on it and my personal opinions as a fan of the first season and the original 90s anime and the manga. I want to start off with the broad strokes of the narrative issues because that is the backbone of this season's problems. First off, the pacing is super breakneck. It is adapting Trigun's Maximum, which is significantly longer than the original Trigun manga. It is a lot of content to put into 12 episodes, meaning we have very little downtime for these characters to stop and talk to each other, which is very important for a character-driven narrative like Trigun. But we barely see these characters having downtime and discussing the events with each other because we just have to go to the next thing. That brings me to my next point, which is the structure is very confusing. It is very linear. It is very, and then this happened, and then this happened. It does not really linger on events that are crucial to these characters in this world. For the most part, I think the only time it takes its time is the beginning episodes with the Eric's arc, but even then, it's not handled the best, and I do have my problems with it still. Compared to the rest of the season, it actually kind of takes its time, but after that, it's kind of just like go, go, go. We need to go to the next thing. We need to go to the next arc. We can't linger on these feelings. We cannot delve into these new characters we're introducing, our old ones who have changed. And it's frustrating because I know that they can make a story that has decent pacing. I wouldn't say that Stampede had the best pacing in the world, but it was good. It looks like a fucking masterpiece compared to Trigun Stargaze, which literally gives me like physical pain with how fast it moves. Speaking of whiplash, this season has a bad case of tonal whiplash, in which the first season was very hardcore drama. Like, it really wanted to, linger and simmer in the angsty parts of Trigun instead of the goofiness of the original manga. It felt more like Trimax in the way that it handled Vash's trauma and his decisions, but for some reason this season, which is based off of Trimax, is less angsty and less emotionally driven than the first season. And I think the biggest example of that is how the narrative handles Vash's pacifism, which, despite being the driving force and having legitimate consequences in the first season, literally has no consequences in this one. It makes everything weightless and easy, despite the story insisting that Vash is suffering. Yes, I know Vash is suffering and he's always going through some shit, but the point is that everyone else suffers because of the actions of him and his worldview. Him sparing someone gets other people killed, and that just doesn't happen. All the gung-ho guns get redeemed, except for 2, and all the deaths that could happen and did happen in the manga just don't. And it's very confusing. Like, I'm fine with a kind of like fix-it AU type of thing that they're doing, but it defeats the purpose of what they were setting up in the first season. It is directly contradictory, and ultimately it leads to the story having little to no impact on me when I already inherently cared about these characters, which is very impressive. Let me move on to the setting before I get too deep into the narrative issues and I start to get mad. The setting is about the same as in the first season. The only problem is that everything takes place in these flatly lit desert scenes in the middle of the day. In Trigun Stampede, we had dynamic lighting, we had good cinematography, really good choreography with the fight scenes, and the choreography is still here, but the problem is that everything looks really flat, and some of these things are like poorly rendered. Like, I remember watching this with my friends and saying that some of these shots look like they're out of a fucking PS2 game. That's how poorly they're rendered. And I'm very confused as to how the quality of the cinematography dropped so tremendously. And it really does take away from these dramatic emotional moments when I'm looking at Vash with like very basic cell shading and no depth to the shots at all. It's also very noticeable because this season takes a hardcore turn for the sci-fi. Stampede was always more sci-fi leaning than western leaning, but here we see a lot of technology, we see a lot of spaceships, we get a fucking space fight thing, but I would argue that the sci-fi elements do little to nothing to add to the story. They're kind of just there for set dressing, and that's what I'm trying to get at with the setting, is that it feels very empty and not in, you know, the desert type of way. It just feels like it's empty just because laziness or brainless artistic decisions that add nothing to the narrative and in fact take away from it. Anyway, let's move on to the characters, because these are the real like meat and potatoes of the issues with this season. First off, we got Millie and Meryl. I don't have anything to say about these two other than they don't do anything. They don't really have any like agency in the story. They're kind of just there because they have to be there because Millie and Meryl are in the original, and it's kind of disappointing. I can remember one thing that these two did, maybe two if you include the thing with Millie and Zaze the Beast, but like other than that, they don't really do anything. They're just kind of just there to be comedic relief, and even then they barely show up. And there's a severe lack of merchandise of these two in comparison to their male character counterparts. Speaking of male characters, how about we talk about Wolfwood? He doesn't really do anything either. He has an arc where he starts to follow in Vash's footsteps of pacifism, but that is mostly entirely off screen and we don't really get to see that fleshed out really. He kind of gives up on character for the sake of being with Vash and being supportive to him, and there's no meaningful conflict between the two. Like in the original, they have this big thing between killing and not killing, but in this season, they really don't have that. It's kind of just like Wolfwood just kind of goes along. Sometimes he pouts and is a tsundere, but other than that, he doesn't really have a backbone anymore, I would say. And I would consider that this happens because of the pacing issues I mentioned earlier. We don't have time to focus on Wolfwood or his conflict, and that's really hurtful to the story because Wolfwood is one of the biggest driving forces for Vash besides, you know, his evil twin brother. And now all Wolfwood really has in terms of narrative weight is the 14 fucking fake out deaths we have of him that don't mean anything in the end. So, you know what? I think it's time to talk about it anyway. We should just dive right on into those fake out deaths, shouldn't we? Because that shit really did piss me off. Let's talk about Livio. Oh my god. The setup with him in season 1 was incredible. We got the backstory with him and Wolfwood, and it really showed us how much they cared for each other and how the Eye of Michael just ripped those two away from each other and then proceeded to torture them and make them into human soldiers. That being said, Livio has a very specific way of coping with that horrific trauma he endured in childhood, and I think it's pretty safe to say that he has DID, and it is pretty plain and simple, even in the manga, which came out in the 90s, that Razlo is his alter. Razlo is very entertaining. He is a good character on its own. He wants to get revenge for Livio, who he sees as a different person, which makes sense. But the thing about Razlo, other than him being funny as fuck, is that he dies. Razlo, Livio's alter, is killed by Livio, and that happens after Razlo almost kills Wolfwood. I'm trying to keep my cool here, but legitimately, what were they thinking with the death of Razlo. First off, that shit is not even possible. He cannot kill his alter by ripping off his third arm inexplicably. That is just not possible. That should not be possible. I don't know why they considered that. I don't know why they thought erasing Razlo would be the best for Livio. In the original manga, he learns to cope by, you know, working together with Razlo instead of killing him, getting rid of him like he's a problem to be dealt with instead of a person, which he is. He's supposed to be a person, and it wouldn't make me so angry if Wolfwood died, but Wolfwood doesn't die. He's just fine. They have a fake out death. He's closing his eyes, and then he wakes up, and it's supposed to be funny, and I'm supposed to laugh at it, even though I would have been fine with Wolfwood dying to Livio / Razlo. Like, it's very important to the narrative. It's important to Vash that Wolfwood dies, but no, he's fine. The narrative framing Razlo's DID as a problem to be dealt with is ableism that I haven't encountered in a hot minute. I know DID from Danganronpa that is somehow written better than this. I don't understand what they were trying to do. Razlo was never the problem. The problem was the Eye of Michael and knives. There was no point in killing him. He could have still been there. He could have been in some fights. That would have been cool. He could have interacted with Wolfwood. They could have, you know, spoken to each other, because that seems pretty important to both of them, but no. He just dies. Him and Livio have this weird interaction before he dies where they're like arguing and the animation gets really crazy and it's entertaining, but it's still, I don't know what's happening. I don't understand why they did that. It really pisses me off. It really does. Mind you, I'm saying all this and I'm not even addressing the fact that Livio's design is god-awful. His design in the first season was flawless. I don't know why he looks like that. I think it's the very sterile lighting that makes him look so god-awful, but he is actually atrocious to look at. Let's just move on to Vash. Vash, I really don't have much to say about him other than he doesn't really do much, and he's kind of just there to be petite and give little cute little smiles and also be the catalyst to Knives' downfall. He doesn't really do much else. He sits there and hesitates on killing people while they have his best friend in a chokehold. Really, there's not really much to say about him, to be honest, because he doesn't do anything. All the spice and anger that OG Vash had, even in the first season of the show, is completely gone. He is just a plot device, to be honest. He is just there for things to happen to him, and we feel sorry for him, even though I don't really feel anything. There's this whole subplot of him getting captured and then being tortured by Legato for a while, and that really doesn't get addressed. And then he hesitates on pulling the trigger on that guy, you know, Legato, the one who tortured him and has Wolfwood in a death chokehold. Yeah, he hesitates on pulling that trigger. He only does it when Wolfwood's on the brink of death, and then when he does, guess who stops the bullet? It's Knives, here to mitigate any choice that Vash makes and to make him obsolete in his own story. What incredible writing. I really am impressed that they adapted this story and made it so much better. I love this interpretation of Vash where he just sits there and does nothing and things happen to him, because you know what? That's what pacifists really do. They just sit there and do nothing, right? Speaking of doing nothing, that is certainly not what Knives does. Knives is literally the entire plot. He pushes everything forward. He is the main villain. He is literally like Satan, and he is basically irredeemable. I would say that this Knives is horribly watered down. I don't know what really they were going for with Knives being this obsessed over Vash, but he really is obsessed with them. And based off of one of the retweets from one of the animators, I am very concerned about that obsession. King Brotherfucker is back. Okay, dude. Other than the weird shit, he's a horribly boring villain now. He kind of just like monologues and absorbs plants into this grand scheme to kill everyone. But you know, it doesn't work because obviously Vash stops him. But not before the narrative really drills into your head that Knives is lonely and he was holding all the pain and suffering inside of him, the secrets about Ram that Vash never knew. And of course, that makes him less of a villain, even though that really doesn't mean much, to be honest. And I'm fine with Vash thinking that. I'm fine with him trying to connect with Knives, because that's just who Vash is. But the problem is the narrative also going along with that, instead of showing and addressing the fact that Knives is a fucking genocidal maniac who will do anything to attain his goals of destroying humanity. The problem with Knives is really the problem with this entire show. Any decision these characters make feel empty because of the pacing. We don't get to see the consequences, and if we do, it's not for very long, so we can't really digest what's happening. Knives does things, other things happen, and then we move on. I think they should have just done 3 seasons. It would have been better. I don't know if the story would have been better, but it definitely would have been better paced, because we need time to breathe in between all of these plot points and all these characters getting redeemed who get little to no screen time. But no, we get Trimax in 12 episodes, and it is genuinely the biggest clusterfuck I have seen in probably years, and it's really frustrating because I care about this franchise so much, and I think Trimax is one of the best manga I've ever read, and to see it get such a half-assed adaptation because they just genuinely don't have the time and to put the effort in that is needed is disappointing and anger-inducing in parts, where I knew they could have done better with a simple change like Razlo living or Vash killing Legato instead of Knives saving him and then killing Legato himself. So yeah, those are all my thoughts. Maybe later I'll make a more comprehensive analysis, but for now I really just wanted to get everything off of my chest because it was a lot, especially watching it while it was airing. And thank you for listening to me rant for almost 20 minutes about a little anime. Also, watch Fate Strange Fake. Bye bye!